countries, so those nations may have more of a concern about supplying their country's energy needs given what's happening in Libya, which is, of course, a major supplier for those countries.
Okay, Rosalind, stay there for us for just a second. We have, as Rosalind was saying there, Libya's ambassador to the United States has quit. Now, we do have a televised statement from him. Ali AlJazeera said that he remained committed to Libya.
First of all, just let me start by saying that I resign from serving the current dictatorship regime. But I will never resign from serving our people until their voices reach the whole world and until their goals are achieved.
Back to Rosalind. How is all of this playing inside the United States domestically? Because outside the United States, there is a lot of scrutiny about how fast and how firmly the United States acts.
Certainly people are taking note of all of these resignations. They are all, agreed that no one thought that Libya, of all countries, would disintegrate so quickly. Now, whether or not that means that there's going to be any concrete action, today is the day where we start trying to find out, because Monday here in the United States was a federal holiday and U.S. officials were, for the most part, unavailable. Certainly the question is going to be, what now? Hundreds of people have been killed. People are being essentially robbed as they try to leave the country, as we've heard from both Nazanin Moshiri and Jamal al-Shayal, who are on the border with Libya. We've also seen that people are very concerned about their safety inside country. There are reports of people who are being trapped inside certain embassies. So the question is going to be for the U.S. government. You have been trying to pursue closer relations with Libya. What sort of leverage do you actually have in country? Let's not forget, one of the first people who came to visit Hillary Clinton soon after she became Secretary of State was Muqtassim Gaddafi, the National Security Advisor and one of Colonel Gaddafi's sons.
OK, Rosalind, thanks very much indeed for that. Rosalind Jordan in Washington, D.C. there. Of course, the United Nations Security Council is going to hold a session behind closed doors on Libya in the coming hour. Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has made his feelings perfectly clear about the situation in Libya.
I have seen very disturbing and shocking scenes where Libyan authorities have been firing at demonstrators from the warplanes and helicopters. This is unacceptable. This must stop immediately. This is a serious violation of international humanitarian law.
Well, Kath Turner is at the UN in New York for us. Kath, this Security Council meeting was asked for by the Libyan UN diplomats. What do they want? What's going to be discussed?
Well, surely that meeting is due to take place and start in around 40 minutes' time. Now, what Libya wants is for a vigorous debate about how the UN can enforce some kind of effect in Libya with the escalation of violence we've seen in the last 24 to 48 hours. Just a reminder to our viewers that Monday was a public holiday. Today, Tuesday, this is going to be the full sitting of the Security Council, closed doors, as you mentioned. What they're probably going to do at this point is discuss two things. A statement which will come out after the meeting. That's the indication that they're giving us, that the Security Council will put out a statement. The other major thing they'll be discussing is this idea of a no-fly zone. Now, the UN Security Council has done this before. In 1992, they did enact this in cooperation with NATO in Bosnia. That was overseen by what's called the United Nations Protection Force. Even if these no-fly zones do come to pass, there is a lot of fine detail that needs to be sorted out. Who would enforce it? What would be the rules of engagement? But what we're hearing is that those are the two things that will be worked on in the initial stages of this emergency session.
And what's the feeling over there? Is everybody on board with this?
Very much so at this stage, Shirley. As I said, the diplomats and the staff at the United Nations are just starting to arrive here. It's 8:30 local time, but from the talks and the discussions that we've had with people, they are very much behind stopping what's going on in Libya. The problem with the Security Council, as happens often with these kind of situations where the UN is asked to intervene, is that you have those 5 permanent council members, 2 of which are very reluctant to get involved in other countries' domestic affairs. That that is Russia and China. They do not like to meddle in these affairs. They don't want their own countries being held up to these kind of standards. So it'll be interesting to see how long it will take the UN Security Council to agree on even the mere wording of any kind of statement and perhaps the conditions attached to a no-fly zone. But certainly the other members of the Security Council and other diplomats have all been watching and saying that they're horrified by what's going on in Libya and they want some kind of action out of UN today.
Yeah, Ban Ki-moon made it quite clear that he was horrified by what's going on, and the UN human rights chief has said that the events could amount to crimes against humanity. Do you think there is scope for some kind of international investigation into the deaths in Libya?
I certainly think that's something that could be on the cards, Julie, when the UN human rights chief makes a fairly strong call for that kind of action. New York will have to take heed to that. The problem, again, with the United Nations is those deaths are happening now. There is violence by the government against its own people. UN is not the fastest moving body in the world. This would be an investigation that would take possibly weeks, months, possibly years to set up. When you talk about any kind of investigative panel associated with the United Nations, there's a lot of wrangling between the countries. Who sits on the panel? What are the terms and the criteria upon which they will investigate? Will the government, the Libyan government, let them in to investigate? So the idea of a panel investigating crimes against humanity is certainly something that the United Nations purports to support and investigate. But again, the fine details are something that will have to be looked into, and that kind of thing always takes time here.
Kath, thanks very much indeed for that. Kath Turner in New York there. So that's the United Nations Security Council meeting, which is due to take place at 14G, which is in about half an hour's time. An hour later, the Arab League is due to hold a meeting. That meeting is going to take place in Cairo. Shireen Tadros is there for us. Shireen, first of all, just tell us, what are we expecting out of the Arab League meeting?
Not very much. I mean, Kath was just talking there about how slow the UN is to move. Well, the Arab League is also always bogged down with these statements, and we expect really that it will take a few hours for any kind of statement to be released from the Arab League. Now, the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, has spoken out in the past 24 hours. He said that he's deeply concerned over the bloodshed in Libya, and he's made the point that Arab people have a right to legitimately bring down essentially their government, or at least ask for regime change. It'll be interesting to see, given the membership of the Arab League and the fact that there are members within that league like Yemen, Algeria, Morocco, Bahrain, who are facing uprisings, or at least the seeds of uprisings in their countries. It'll be interesting to see how exactly they word that bit of the statement where they talk about the right of the people to regime change.
Yeah, it certainly puts the Arab League in a very interesting position. As far as Egypt goes, huge efforts afoot to try and get its nationals out of Libya. What's happening with that evacuation effort?
Well, it's in full force, and the transitional government here is going to great lengths to try and reassure the millions of Egyptians who have family members and friends in Libya that the safe passage of Egyptian nationals is being secured. It is really the